Bibles to Psalm 93. Psalm 93. First thing noticeable about this psalm is its brevity, right? It's a very small psalm. Let's read it. The Lord reigneth, clothed with majesty. The Lord is clothed with strength, wherewith he's girded himself. The world also is established, that it cannot be moved. Thy throne is established of old, thou art from everlasting. The floods have lifted up, O Lord, the floods have lifted up their voice. The floods lift up their waves. The Lord on high is mightier than the noise of many waters, yea, than the mighty waves of the sea. Thy testimonies are very sure. Holiness becomes thy house, O Lord, forever. Father, help me to speak and each of us to hear this most precious psalm. Guide our minds as we close out this day. Well, again, since it's Father's Day, we use an illustration from that. How many little children say, my father is richer than your father, or my father can beat up your father, or all that kind of stuff? My dad can beat up your dad. Peanuts cartoon said, one of the children was saying to the other one, my dad's taller than your dad. And the other one said, my dad goes to PTA meetings. Well, that shut down that, didn't it? And so, that's kind of the way things are with little kids. Well, Psalm 93 is the first of a string of psalms praising the sovereignty, might, majesty of Israel's God. And if you go down to 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, we're all in the same thing here. And this psalm definitely is talking about God's sovereignty, his reign. I'll give you some titles, different ones. I won't name the authors, but some of the Bible teachers have titled the Psalms different way. The Lord is King, a psalm to God, a king, the throne above the tumult, God the King. It's the psalm of omnipotent sovereignty. Bullock translates this, the Lord reigns, he is robed in majesty. Celebrate the Lord's kingship. And it's a psalm of the heavenly King. Another said this thought, he is calm who believes that God is sovereign. Do we believe that? Now, in the world in which we live and our children and grandchildren have to live. My son James sent a video of my grandson crawling for the first time. And it was kind of fun. Watch little Hayes begin to crawl. But you can't help but think, what kind of a world does he have to grow up in? As evil men and seducers wax worse and worse. Hurtado said on Psalm 93, it inspires us to live with confidence. Our God is Lord of creation and the Lord of the nations. No hostile forces we encounter in our lives can ultimately withstand our King, who is armed with strength. Some people, sometimes nations run out of arms and armies. But God is always armed with strength, infinite and everlasting. Now, this psalm is so very applicable as I thumbing through the Psalms and thinking about something to teach tonight, thinking how applicable is this psalm to the times of turmoil we live in, not just the times of turmoil our children will live in, which will probably be more tumultuous. Think of the turmoil right now that seems to be accelerating, economic turmoil. social turmoil, moral turmoil, political turmoil, military turmoil, religious turmoil. Wherever you turn, the waves of turmoil are whirling. Pretty noisy down here with all that turmoil. Now, the ancient Israelites, when this psalm was written, they also lived in turmoil and times of turmoil, because since the fall of man, there's always been turmoil on this planet. This planet has not known peace since Adam and Eve sinned. And it won't know peace till the Prince of Peace comes to enforce the peace. But that doesn't mean that God is not in control, even when there's turmoil. And that's what I want to try to emphasize tonight. And I have 3 points, that 3 great truths that stand out about our God in times of turmoil that we need to remind ourselves and others of in turmoil. Otherwise, we will just be overcome with what we can't change and what we can't stop. First, verses 1 and 2, our God is sovereign over his world. The creator of the universe. Nothing happens on this planet that's outside of the realm of his sovereignty. And the first 2 verses teach that the Lord reigns. He is clothed with majesty. The Lord is clothed with strength. Wherewith he hath girded himself. The world is also established that it cannot be moved. Get the word world there. Thy throne is established of old, powered from everlasting. There are many political pundits that are making points against our current president. They say he's weak, and because he's weak, enemies have taken advantage of that. Who knows how true some of those things are? But I know one thing, I'm weak. You're weak. The things of life are too big for us. Why don't we just admit that? But God, and God is fully up to the task of dealing with the turmoil in his world. Our God is sovereign over his world, and he exercises that sovereignty. He's not sovereign in name, he's sovereign in fact. And the rest of this psalm deals with that. Psalm 95 deals with that. If you look in verse 3, the Lord is a great God and a great king above all gods. Now, whether that word gods is referring to idols or human leaders, he is used both ways. He's over them all. There's no demon outside the sovereignty of God. There's no human leader outside of the sovereignty of God. In his hand are the deep places of the earth, and the strength of the hills is his. Sea is his, and he made it. We're going to come back to that in Psalm 93. I'm in Psalm 95 now. And the dry land. Oh, come, let's worship and bow down. Let's kneel before the Lord, our Maker. I hope we get our minds above the turmoil and even above what the television says and the YouTube say about all the political issues, and just rest in our God. Psalm 96:9. Worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness. Fear before him all the earth. Say among the nations that the Lord reigns. Say among the nations that the Lord reigns. Say among the nations the Lord reigns. The nations were bigger and more powerful than Israel, but they're not bigger and more powerful than Israel's God. The world also shall be established. It shall not be moved. He'll judge the peoples righteously. Let the heavens rejoice. Let the earth be glad. Let the sea roar in the fullness thereof. It's all a celebration of the sovereignty of God. Let the field be joyful and all therein. Then shall all the trees of the forest rejoice before the Lord, for he comes to judge the earth. He'll judge the earth with righteousness and the peoples with truth. Celebration. Celebration is the opposite of consternation. The do. Getting terrible. Maybe I should watch some more conspiracy videos to comfort my soul. Very important that we look beyond the evil and focus on God, who's in control. God has not let go of the reign of the universe. He has not let go of the reign. You remember the Western movie Stagecoach, and the Indians are attacking them, and the arrows are flying, and John Wayne, all of a sudden, guy gets shot, and he drops the reins. Andy Devine drops the reins, and the reins go up, and they're where the horses are running like crazy. And there's no reins on that Stagecoach, and John Wayne jumps in. He was young enough to do that, or the stunt double was, and he gets the reins, gets a hold of them again. God has never let go of the reins and never, ever will. We're not in a stagecoach out of control with the Indians shooting at us. There's nobody driving. No, that's not the picture. It's a good thought here. In fact, it's extremely needful thought. And did I read Psalm 98? I can't remember, but let's read 98:4. Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. Make a loud noise and rejoice and sing praise. Sing to the Lord with the harp, and the voice of the psalm, with trumpets and sound cornet. Make a joyful noise before the Lord our King. Let the sea roar. Let it roar. Let it roar. And the fullness thereof, and the world, and they that dwell in them. Let them roar. Let the floods clap their hands, and the hills together before the Lord. For he comes to judge the earth with righteousness, and he'll judge the world and the peoples with equity. We got nothing to worry about. By the way, that's Psalm 99. The Lord reigns, let the people tremble. He sits between the cherubim, let the earth be moved. The Lord is great in Zion. He's high above all the peoples. Praise the great and all-inspiring name, holy. Now, God is not just over us. The God of the Bible is not just over us. He is over us. He's over everything. He's over our enemies, both the visible and invisible ones. He's over all the powerful enemies, whether they're anti-Christian or anti-US or anti-whatever. And the picture here back in Psalm 93, and I was reading the NIV Study Bible on it, and John Steck was the writer in the Psalms of the notes. He's some kind of Reformed theologian. I think he taught at Reformed Seminary. Still teaches there. I doubt it, though, because that's a long time ago. But he had a note on Psalm 93. Though Israel, it was a great note. Though Israel as a nation has come late on the scene. Remember, there were other people historically before them running around. They didn't become a nation till 1450 BC or so. So Israel as a nation has come late on the scene. Her God has been king since before the creation of the world. Have you ever heard people say, well, Christianity, there's other religions before Christianity? Yeah. And there were other gods before Christianity started. But our God is the God of the Old Testament who happens to be the creator of the world, right? And so, though Israel as a nation has come late on the scene, her God has been king since before the creation of the world. That's what it says. The Lord reigns. He's clothed with majesty. The Lord's clothed with strength. Wherewith he's girded himself. The world's established. It can't be moved. Thy throne is established of old. Thou art from everlasting. He's before everybody. He's been on the job a long time. The sovereign Lord of Israel is the sovereign Lord of the whole world. That's what it's saying. It's not like our God's sovereign over us, but he's not sovereign over the Babylonians or the Assyrians or the Egyptians. No, he's sovereign over everybody, everywhere. And Pharaoh learned that the hard way. One said, the Lord's relationship is not a new thing. It was established from of old. Now, I don't know how many kids would go around saying, my dad's older than your dad. I think Andrea could say that. But most of her friends, my dad's older than your dad. And I don't think anybody would ever brag about that. But we could say our God's older than any of the other gods. They've come up lately. Jeremiah says something. They're new gods. They're the new gods on the block. Our God is the everlasting God. He's older than any of the other gods out there, even in name. He reigns the world he made. The King of Israel is the sovereign of the whole world. I was reading the Jewish commentary on this, and in verse 2, Owen, the writer of that commentary, he's not a Christian, but he said, his kingship goes back to the beginning of time. He's talking about his kingship over this planet. So God's always been sovereign. He's sovereign. He'll always be sovereign. And there's something else besides him, besides sovereignty. He has majesty. He is majestic. He is mighty. That's what the psalm is celebrating. The Lord reigns. He is clothed with majesty. The Lord is clothed with strength, wherewith he girds himself. The world is also established, and it can't be moved. The throne is established of old, from everlasting. He is a God with majesty, and he is a God with might. He's majestic, and he's mighty. And his sovereignty is majestic, and his sovereignty is mighty. Spurgeon said one of the best statements I ever saw on this. When kings, he might be an ugly guy, he might be a skinny guy, he might be a sickly guy, but he puts on the robe of majesty, right? You want to be seen in his robes, because the robes dress him up and make him look more than he is. And Spurgeon said, not with emblems of majesty, but with majesty itself. Earthly kings don't want to be seen in anything that makes them not look like a leader and powerful and all that. So they're very, very concerned with their image. Putin is very short, so he's got lips in his shoes. And one guy I read today, they had him sitting in a chair that was very low so Putin could stand over him. All image with that. And of course, he wouldn't be the only one. What's that? Yeah, Napoleon was very short, yeah. But God, he doesn't just wear majesty like a robe. He is majestic. He is mighty. And so his sovereignty is majestic sovereignty. His sovereignty is mighty sovereignty. That's what this is talking about. And Spurgeon said, he is not the semblance, but the reality of sovereignty. His garments of glory are not his only array. He wears strength also as his girdle. He's also strong. In fact, he's girt with omnipotence. This is great poetry, isn't it? I mean, it's just something. Yeah, I get the idea of how great and glorious and good our God is. So a little kid that says, my dad can whip your dad, well, we can say my God can whip all the rest of you. He's in control. This is his world. He made it. He runs it. There's no contest. There's no doubt. It's a foregone conclusion. We can be as confident as Elijah was at Mount Carmel when he took on all the Baal prophets. No question about how it was going to turn out. The Lord, he is God. The people finally got it, but Elijah knew it long before they got it. One writer on Psalm 93 quoted this, and I've heard this quote, 30 years, 40 years, I've heard Abraham Kuyper's quote. He was the famous Dutch theologian. And in 1880, he wrote this, and you've heard it before. There is not a square inch in the whole domain of our human life of which Christ, who is our sovereign over all, does not cry, mine. Very famous quote by Abraham Kuyper. And I'm reminded when I reread that quote, it had been a while since I'd read it, but I've heard it before down through the years. All things were made by Jesus Christ. They were all made by him and what? For him. They were all made by him and they're all made for him. And so our God is sovereign over his world. And our God reveals himself in Jesus Christ. Our Lord even now is sovereign. So just tuck that away if things get worse. If the stock market crashes, your 401 goes down, if inflation goes way up and you end up penniless, God's still sovereign. If Russia tosses a nuke our way, it can get here in 84 seconds. 84 seconds from the time they shoot it off before it's hitting our country. Sovereign. God's sovereign. Nobody's going to push that button until God says so. Sovereign. God's sovereign over his world and everything in it. Now, the second part of the psalm, our God is sovereign over the waves. Sovereign over the world. He's sovereign over the waves. And let's see what he says here in 3 and 4. The floods have lifted up, O Lord. The floods have lifted up their voice. The floods lift up their waves. The Lord on high is mightier than the noise of many waters, yea, than the mighty waves of the sea. Now, my experience of the ocean is rather limited. I'm used to the waves at Myrtle Beach. When I went to Mozambique, I saw waves. We were doing beach evangelism. We were going up and down. I had Portuguese tracks, witnessing to people, and those waves were awesome. They were hitting the beach 10 feet high. Probably, I'm guessing. I never saw anything like it. I guess surfers love it over there. I'm sure Case has seen some in Hawaii. There's other places where there's really waves. But when you're dealing with waves, even at Myrtle Beach, you're kind of in the middle of something you can't control. In my younger days, I used to boogie board with my boys. And with Andrea some, but not Amy some. But by the time of Andrea, I was building sandcastles on the beach. We didn't do a lot of boogie boarding together. I got out a little bit, but when you're on that board and you're out there and you're trying to catch the wave, you can't control what happens and when it happens. You can guess after you've done it a while, you can kind of guess when the next big wave. You're waiting for the big one, right? To carry you as far as you can go. Not too big so you don't face plant in the sand. And so you're trying to time it, but you can't control it. It's going to do what it wants to do. And even in Myrtle Beach, many times we'd be walking the beach and our kids would start out over here and the tide would take them clear down the beach, walking. And you'd have to keep walking down the beaches almost as fast as you could in the night to keep up with them so they're not down here and you're over here. So the waves are not controllable by man. We can't do that. We can't do that, but our God is sovereign over the waves. The Son of God proved that when he was here in this world. he was sovereign over the waves. He stopped the waves with a word. And then he walked on the waves. It was like, I got to show you two different ways that I'm sovereign over the waves. One, I can walk on them and I can make Peter walk on them. Two, I can just stop it. And so physical waves are part of this. But there's a twofold reference here. The physical waves, literal waves of the ocean and of the Sea of Galilee, our Lord certainly manifested his sovereignty there. Can I do that? Can you do that? Can you go to the ocean and say, peace be still? Can't do it. I can make bubbles in a teapot, turning on the switch. Turning it off, I can stop it bubbling. Can't make waves. And so you and I are not sovereign over the waves. Now, the waves that he's talking about, these physical waves, have different references. Number one, to the original waves of creation where the Holy Spirit moved on the waters. And the dry land appeared. Two, the waves of Noah's flood. He was sovereign over those waves. Psalm 104, 4-10 celebrates that. And Job 38, 8-11. The physical waves obey his will. And it's true now, though, too. Every wave that has ever waved, every wave that's ever waved is under his control right now. Jonah found that out in his day. We can find it out. There's been, I think, 4 times in my life I got seasick on the ocean. Or was right on the edge of being seasick. But there was absolutely nothing I could do except hit the shore. And imagine drifting up and down in a little life raft or something like that, and the waves are going over you and so forth. Don't you wish you could say, peace be still, and everything would be better? But you're helpless in front of the waves, but God's not. Our God is sovereign over the waves of the sea because he made the sea. It's part of his creation. There's another kind of wave, however, in physical waves. There's providential waves. You see, waves is used poetically here for other kinds of things. And those waves can be individual. Psalm 42:7, where the psalmist is knocked off his feet by the waves of his personal life. And he recognizes God's sovereign over that. And what a precious thought that is, to know whatever knocks me off my feet. In Psalm 42:7, deep calls unto deep at the noise of your water spouts. All your waves and billows are gone over me. I told you when I was a toddler, a speedboat came in near the swimming area at Rocky Fork Lake, and wake from the boat went into the swimming area, and it just flipped me upside down. I couldn't figure out how to get out. My dad had to come and save my life as I was getting ready to drown. And waves can hit you, and if you don't know what to do, you're in trouble. And I was in trouble. Today, we've got other kind of waves. They're providential waves. How about what's going on between China and Taiwan? That's a wave. It's going to hit someday. How about Russia and Ukraine? How about Israel and Iran? How about Greece and Turkey? You up on those things? There's a lot of waves. How about what's going on in different places in Africa, India? No end to it. The nations are often pictured as, in the turmoil of nations, are often pictured as waves in the Bible. William Plummer said, floods and waters are favorite emblems of tumults and commotions in kingdoms or nations. And he's right. In Psalm 45:6, if you go there, 45:6 is something to remember. Your throne, O God, is forever and ever. Scepter of thy kingdom is a right scepter. His throne is forever and ever. If you go to different references in the Bible about the turmoil of nations, it often uses the turmoil of the sea and the waves of the sea to picture the turmoil of the nations. Let me show you that. It's a poetic picture. Turn with me to Psalm 18:4. Sometimes it's the turmoils of our personal life. All of a sudden, we're drowning. We're in the waves. And Psalm 18:4 says, the sorrows of death compassed me about. The floods of ungodly men made me afraid. Sorrows of Sheol compassed me about. The snares of death were round about me. In my distress, I called on the Lord. I cried unto God. He heard my voice out of his temple. My cry came before him, even to his ears. And of course, the Lord delivered. But turn to Isaiah 8. Turn to Isaiah 8, verse 7. Have you read what happened in Yellowstone? Just a heartbreak to me. I mean, it's flooding. They just got dumped on. And there's things at Yellowstone, there's just more destruction at Yellowstone than they can even put on television because the extent of it. But God is sovereign. Isaiah 8, verse 7. Now therefore, behold, the Lord brings up upon them the waters of the river, strong and many, even the king of Assyria and all his glory. He'll come up over all its channels and go over all its bank. For the Assyrians were a wave, right? And he'll pass through Judah, he'll overflow and go over. He'll reach even to the neck, and the stretching out of his wings shall fill the breadth of thy land, O Lord. Now, if you're walking around and all of a sudden you're up to your neck, that's a little intimidating. Andrea and Linda and I were tubing in Tennessee, and we were getting ready to beach our tubes, or you're sitting in the tube and you're going down the river. We'd done it all day. And Andrea and Linda were ahead of me. I'd like to keep behind them so I can see what they're doing. And there was a path up the bank to the bus. I was turning their tubes and you go back. Well, I'm staying behind them, and they both got off where we were supposed to go off, and there was a rapids right where you were supposed to get off, and you didn't want to go right, you wanted to go left. Well, all of a sudden there's a lady in front of me, and she dumps herself out of the inner tube right in front of me. And she's really struggling. So I could either bang into her, or go left and bang into Linda and Andrea, or go right and go down the river. So I went right. And I thought, this is going to be a long walk. And so the rapids were pretty high. And so I decided I'm going to chance it that there might be a way I can find bottom and get off here, because it was too late to try to swim out. So I flipped myself out of the raft, and I was over my head. And then all of a sudden I came up and I found bottom with my feet. I was only as far from the bank as Mike Farmer is for me. And so but the water was up to here. And I'm in the rapid. Andrew's laughing, she remembers. But I'm going to tell the part. And all of a sudden there was a fella there, a young guy. He saw what had happened, and he reached out his hand. And I thought I still had hold of my inner tube, because I thought I was going down the river. So I went up to him, gave him my inner tube, and then grabbed his hand, and I got up out of there. I'm glad that I had that opportunity, because I was almost over my head. I was beyond my ability to, I lost my dignity that day. They still laugh at me about it. Of course, that's not the only time that's happened. Turn with me to Isaiah 17. Isaiah 17, 12. Isaiah 17:12. Woe to the multitude of many people who make noise like the noise of the sea. Let me read that again. The people are making noise like the noise of the seas, to the rushing of nations that make a rushing like the rushing of mighty waters. The nations shall rush like the rushing of many waters, but God shall rebuke them, and they'll flee far off, and shall be chased like the chaff of the mountains before the wind, like a rolling thing before the whirlwind. What wonderful encouragement that is in the times in which we live. And the picture is this, and Van Gemeren, the Reformed commentator, said, the nations may rise against God's rule, but it will fail. Surprise, surprise, America is rising against God's rule. People are demonstrating for the right of murdering babies. People are offended at anybody that won't use the right pronoun. It's in total rebellion against God's rule. And there's a young man that went to our church that lost his job Friday over not bending to his pronoun. So may God help us to recognize God is what? He's sovereign. These people make a lot of noise and it's intimidating, but we don't have anything to worry about. Our job is to do our job and let God take care of everything else. And there may be times when we're in difficulty. There may be times when we feel intimidated, but that's okay. He rules the waves. He's sovereign over the waves of the nations. In America, we think we control the elections. No, we don't. So he controls who gets in power, when, whether they're a good ruler or a bad ruler, or whether you're a string of bad ones. Psalm 89 or Psalm 65. Go to Psalm 65. I want you to get that one. Psalm 65:6. By his strength sets fast the mountains, being girded with power. Verse 7, who stills the noise of the seas, the noise of the waves, and the tumult of the what? People. So this is a constant metaphor for the noise of the nations. The tumult of the nations are pictured like a bunch of waves that are impossible to control, but the God control. Psalm 89 is a psalm about the Davidic covenant. And in that psalm, Psalm 89:9, you rule of the raging of the sea, when the waves thereof rise and still them. You've broken Rahab in pieces as one is slain, scattered your enemies with your strong arm. God's in control, and the Davidic covenant will achieve its purpose. William Graham Scroggie said, it will be well for God's people to realize this when proud civilizations deny the divine sovereignty and shape their course on the assumption that might is right, not understanding all appearances to the contrary. It is still true that the Lord reigns. People have written God off, right? They've written the God of the Bible off. They think they've outgrown that whole concept, but the Lord still reigns. And while it's true the Lord is sovereign over the mighty waters, literally, the context, Froggy says, demands a symbolic meaning, and I think that's true. It's both are true. He's above all the noise. Psalm 2, he that sits in heavens will what? He's going to laugh. Kings of the earth are going to take counsel together against the Lord and against this Christ. God's going to laugh. He's not worried about it. He's sovereign over the waves. Physically, he's sovereign over the waves, politically and culturally. Monarchies, oligarchies, democracies, dictatorships, all the threats, all the plots, all the troubles, all the turmoil. God's sovereign over it. And that even includes false teachers in churches. Sometimes we think, oh, don't we have it bad enough? How come we got to have all these false teachers? Look in Jude 12. All this false Christianity that gives people excuses for their unbelief. Jude 12. Speaking of the false teachers, they are spots in your love feast when they feast with you, feeding themselves without fear. Clouds are they without water, carried about by winds, trees whose fruit is withered, without fruit, twice dead, plucked up by the roots. He's got a lot of things to say about these false Christian teachers. Verse 13, raging waves of the sea. That's going on in the Southern Baptist Convention right now, isn't it? Raging waves of the sea, foaming out their own shame, wandering stars, to whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever. So God's even in control of all the false teaching that happens, whether it's total apostasy or just steps in apostasy the churches make by compromising with this, that, and the other. God's in control. Turn to Revelation 13. I want to show you something I think you know. Remember the two beasts of chapter 13? First beast, I believe, is the Antichrist. Where's he come from? Sea. He comes from the sea. I think the Antichrist is political and the false prophets religious. Probably a pope, maybe something else. Revelation 13, I stood on the sand of the sea, and behold, a beast rise up out of the sea. I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads, 10 horns, upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemies. This is referencing back to the book of Daniel, isn't it? And all of this stuff, this is nations, these 10 horns, and comes out of the turmoil of nations. The beast is the Antichrist, end-time Antichrist is going to come out of the turmoil of nations. Think, haven't we had enough turmoil with World War I and World War II? Nope, we got to have some more. I was in the 4 horsemen ride. One of them, famine's another. We got different things coming, right? When the dragon, and notice in verse 3, I saw one of his heads as though it were wounded to death, and deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. They worshiped the dragon who gave power to the beast, and they worshiped the beast who's like the beast, who's able to make war with him. And there was given to him a mouth speaking great things, and blasphemies, and power was given him to continue 42 months. Notice he's got a very limited time. 42 months. It's less than a president's term. Who determined that term of the Antichrist? God. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name. This is the turmoil that caused by the Antichrist. It comes out of the sea, the tabernacle, and them that dwell in heaven. And it was given to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And power was given him over all kindreds, tongues, and nations. And all that dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life, the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. Guess what? God's in control of this too, because he's in control of the sea. God's sovereign over all the historical, providential developments of history. Daniel 2 and 7 describe it. So back in Psalm 93, I'm sorry. Alexander McLaren, writing on Psalm 93, says verses 4 and following describe the magnitude of God's exalted greatness. He's sovereign over the sea, not just the water waves, but the political waves and the philosophical waves and the cultural waves and all the waves. So God's sovereign over the world. God's sovereign. Our God is sovereign over the waves. And finally, our God exercises his sovereignty both by his word and his work. In his word, he exercises sovereignty over us. And in his work, he exercises sovereignty over us. That sovereignty is something that's not just for the nations, it's something for his people. And he goes on and he says in verse 5, thy testimonies are very sure. That word testimonies are statutes. It refers to God's decrees, refers to his word. It's used in Psalm 119 very much. Your statutes stand fast. The Bible is written, be heard and obeyed. And God has a rule for you and me. It's his word. Gidner calls them the testimonies and affirmations. Scripture rests on the infinity of God. He's in unchangeable truths. And what a precious thing it is. God's world is governed by God's moral laws. Nobody can get out of it. They want to change it. We don't like marriage anymore. We're going to do something different. We want abortion. We want this. We want that. It doesn't change. You can break those laws. God's ordained that you can break them, but they're unchangeable as God himself. Leopold paraphrases this: whatever the Lord says can be absolutely relied upon in spite of the appearance to the contrary. You can totally trust any verse in the Bible as his truth. Properly and correctly interpreted, it reveals the moral and spiritual realities of God's universe. 13 times in Psalm 119, this very word is used of the Bible. So God rules his people by his word. But it's not just that. It says, thy testimonies are very sure, and holiness becomes thy house. God in the Old Testament had a house, and in that house it was the temple, and that house had priests, and that house has altars, and that house had sacrifices, and that house had the pageantry of the cross before there was a cross. So the temple is a prophetic, symbolic picture of Jesus Christ and the cross, and God is ruling his people by that. Goes again. Spurgeon said the whole psalm is most impressive and is calculated to comfort the distressed. Caution, timorous, and assist the. You feel like things are out of control? Maybe from your viewpoint and mine, we can't control them, but God's even controlling all this. Probably looked, God was out of control when Joseph didn't get to rule his family, got sold into slavery, got falsely accused. He was marvelously in control, even when it looked like he was out of control. We're not in control. Debbie S. Plummer said, how many wonderful things are presented to the mind of the devout and contemplative, even in this one short. Our security is not in who's president, who's governor, who's senator, who's congressman, who's running the military. Our security is not in America's military might, or if we got bigger weapons or better trained military. Thank God for them, but that's not our security. Our security is not in the economy doing well. I hope it does better. I'd like to make some of that money back that went away. But whether it does or not, our security is not in our economy. It's not in our bank account. Our security is not in our local church. Thank God for our local church. But local churches come and go. Our security is not in our family. Our security is not in our job. Our security is not in ourselves. It's in one place. Our God rules his world. Our God rules the waves in the world. And our God rules everything among his people by his word, by his work on the cross of Calvary. It sets up everything that he has planned from before the creation of the world. I hope this psalm has been a blessing to you, challenge to you. And hopefully, as we walk out of here, we can say natural disasters, famines, wars, persecution, losing my job, keeping my job, whatever. Losing my life or keeping my life, whatever. God runs everything. So let's sing number 51 in the Hymns of Grace and Glory, the Red Hymn Book. Let's sing, Jesus Shall Reign, Psalm 51.